This is the video for White Belt Class 1. The activity is debugging an application. The exercise is a console application, and there are videos for both of those. What I want to do today, this is the first video, the first class in the series. I actually want to run through an exercise that's specific to this particular class. I want to break down use cases into pseudocode and then into code. This is a good practice to get into, so I want to start here. I've actually given you some exercises to kind of run through those, and we'll basically I want to take you through a couple of them. And then from there, I'd like to turn you loose on those. And then once you're done, definitely look at the different languages and make sure to go through both the activity and the exercise. So let me open up. There's an MD file called use case exercises. And the goal here is to turn each of these use cases into pseudocode and then into actual code by calling functions that do not yet exist. So we're going to write code that does not yet exist. This is a tried and true universal way to write code whenever you're stuck. It's a great way to make sure you can break down a problem and understand what's going on into small pieces that are manageable. So what we'll do is we'll create a new file in either Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, depending on which language you're in. I'm in Visual Studio Code right now, so I'll create a new file here. Then we're going to turn each use case into pseudocode, where the English sentences down below here are represented by 0 or more comment lines. So pseudocode is simply a commented out line. It's just text that is a comment. So we, the people, can read it, but the computer will ignore it. So that's the idea of a comment line. Once we're done, we're going to turn each comment line into code by calling functions that do not yet exist. So as you go through these, there will be some sentences that are ignored. If you can remember back to grade school and your mathematics problems, they would give you superfluous information. I've done the same thing. That happens in the real world. So we need to make sure we understand what information we need to ignore. Also, some sentences could result in multiple code lines. We want to make sure that our code is very easy to follow along. So we want to break down sentences into individual code lines where it makes sense. So that's the idea of these. These are broken down into groups of 6. I've got 6 exercises at the beginning. These are kind of the basic ones. The next 6, I'm giving you several more lines that you're going to need to break down into multiple statements, multiple pseudocode lines. The last 6, I'm going to be giving you quite a bit more superfluous information. So basically, these are getting a little more complex as they go. The first 6 are the simplest. We're going to do the first 3 here together in this video to get you started. So hopefully that helps seed the idea and helps you understand the idea of this particular problem space. So let me go ahead and create a new file. I just did Control N. You can also do File, New File. And I'm just going to do everything here. You can pick whatever language. Most of the languages, a comment line is 2 forward slashes. In Python, the comment line starts with the pound sign or the hashtag symbol. So let's start off with the first one. Given the calculator, let's read through the use case to make sure we understand. Given the calculator application is running, let me zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. When the user enters 2 numbers, then the system should display the sum of those 2 numbers. So we need to break this down into pseudocode. So first off, given. A lot of givens are going to be ignored straight out. They're basically context for what's going on. Sometimes there's code we write onto it. Most of the time, the given is actually ignored. So given the application, the calculator application is running, that's obvious. Of course the application is running or we wouldn't have code in the first place. So we're actually going to ignore this first line. The second one, when the user enters 2 numbers. So let's think about this. This is a console application. The user is going to enter 2 numbers. Are we going to prompt them to say enter 2 numbers, maybe separated by a space or a comma? We'll have to be careful about commas because in non-English languages, commas are actually the decimal separator and the period is the thousands separator. So it's opposite of what it is in English. So comma may not be a good idea. We could use semicolons or we could prompt the user for 2 different numbers. And I think 2 different prompts make sense. Please enter your first number. Please enter your second number. So I think that's going to make the most sense. So when the user enters 2 numbers, what we'll do is we'll write out some pseudocode here. So we'll say prompt the user for first number. Prompt the user for second number. So already we have 2 lines from 1 English sentence. Now you don't have to do that. We certainly could have said prompt the user to enter 2 numbers. But again, we'll have to be very specific about how we separate those numbers. Do they hit enter between them? Do they hit a space between them? Are they semicolons? So some number 37 or 34 and then 57, right? So how are they going to enter those numbers? We'll have to be very specific. I'm going to choose to do this as 2 different prompts because I think that's just the cleanest way to do things for the user. Last sentence, then the system should display the sum of those two numbers. So we're going to sum the numbers and we're going to display them. Again, that's two different operations. Could you do them at once? Yeah, probably. Addition's not that complicated, but to help me out, I always like to break things down to as smaller problems as possible. So we'll say sum the two numbers and then display the sum. So that's basically our pseudocode. We've now taken the English sentences and turned them into pseudocode. So that's the step one. Step two is now that we have this pseudocode, what we want to do is we want to write code that does not yet exist to basically run through each of these different areas. So first I need to know what language I'm in. So if you're already in a language, if you're in C#, you're going to do C#. If you're in JavaScript, you're going to do JavaScript. Here on these exercises, we haven't really picked a language. I'm going to choose C#. It's an arbitrary decision. You can pick whichever language you would like, but I'm going to choose C#. For each of these, what we're going to do is we're going to define a method that does not yet exist, but a method name that gets the spirit of what we're trying to do. So in this first one, we're saying prompt the user for the first number. So let's do this dot. So I'm going to always start these with this dot. In Python, it would be self dot, but in other languages, it's this dot. So this dot prompt to, let's see, what do I want to say? Prompt to enter number, prompt for number, prompt user to enter number. All of these are probably good. They're all a little wordy too. Prompt user for number. I like that. Let's just do that. So prompt user for number is our method. And I'm going to go ahead and just do the same thing on each one of these four, and then we'll figure out how to tie these together in just a moment. So the next one, we're also going to prompt user for number. We can actually use the same method we have not yet created in the first line on the second line. We're just prompting for two different numbers. Then we're going to sum the numbers. So we'll say this dot sum. And then finally display, this dot display to user. Oops. So there's our pseudocode. Now we need to tie these together. And what we're doing on each one of these lines is we're going to do input arguments and output arguments. So prompt user for number, is there any input argument? No, not really. Maybe I could say what the text is I want to display, but it's probably overkill. Is there an output? Yes, the number. So we want the first. So I'm going to say var first equals, and then prompt user for number. So that'll prompt them, they'll type it in, and then it'll give me that first number. Second number, same thing. There's nothing that I'm passing in, but I do need the value. And so I'll put that into a variable called second. So var first equals prompt, var second equals prompt. Now sum, we're simply going to pass those values because we need to sum those, first and second. Do we get a response? Yes, we do. We get the sum. So we'll say var little sum equals this dot sum. Finally, we display the sum. Are we passing anything into the arguments? Yes, the sum we want to display. So we'll pass that. Notice that each one of these lines, first is coming from right above it, second is coming from right above it, sum is coming from right above it. So the return value, which is on the left side of the equal sign, is going to get used most likely in the arguments on a line below it. So first and second were the first two values that we got back as return values. We pass those down below into sum. That gives us sum. We pass that down into display to user. So this is now the breakdown of exercise 1 for use cases. So I started with the pseudocode, and then I created the actual code. Now, if this were really code, these methods do not yet exist. I now need to create these functions or these methods in order to be able to make the application work. That's outside of the scope of this. This is basically just running through. This is exercise 1. So let's do another one. Exercise 2. I'm going to do a couple new lines, and we'll do exercise 2. All right, so web application. We're in an e-commerce web application. Given the user is on a product detail page, when the user clicks the add to cart button, then the cart count in the header should increase by 1. Okay, so they're going to say add to cart, and it's going to increase the cart count. So let's again talk through these. Given the user is in a product detail page, any code? No. This tells us where the code's going to be. We're going to be in the product detail page, so we need to find that page inside our code base. We're going to be in there, but there's no code we're writing here. When the user clicks the add to cart button, is there code here? Not really. We could create a method. In fact, I'll do that here to say we're handling the add to cart button. So we'll say public void on or handle. Let's do handle add to cart click. So that's the code here for this line, it's not really pseudocode, it's just telling us the name of the method. In most of the exercise in white belt, I'm going to give you the method already. So you won't really need to do this. I'm doing this here just to help us understand how some of these things lay out. So finally, then the cart in the header, or card count in the header, should increase by 1. So what are we doing here? So we're getting the cart count, we're increasing it by 1, and we're updating the cart count. So there's actually 3 things we're doing here, all inside this one particular sentence. So we'll say, let's see, get cart count, increase cart count by 1, and display updated cart count. So that's the idea here. So that's basically our pseudocode. We started off with the sentences and we've now created our code. You don't need this method. Again, I put this in here to help you understand how this would work in the real world. For these exercises, that's superfluous. You could just get away with these 3 lines here. That is totally fine, but I'm going to go ahead and leave the methods here. So it's up to you. Also keep in mind that as we're going through these, the way I'm breaking these down are not the only way to break these down. There are lots of right ways to break these down. So don't think that if you come up with a different way that it's wrong. It may not be wrong. It may be a completely valid, different way of doing this. All right, so let's create our methods now. Now that we've got our pseudocode, we want to get the cart count. So the cart count, is that in a system behind the scenes? Is that up in the header somewhere? We're not really sure. Not really sure where this is, but we basically need to get that count. So there's a couple things. First off, we'll say this dot get cart count. I think that's a reasonable method. Is this going to return it? So instead of creating the methods first, I'm going to go ahead and figure out the arguments and the return values. Is this getting us a count? Yes, absolutely. So we'll say cart count equals this dot get cart count. Next line, we're going to increase the cart count by 1. So cart count equals cart count plus 1. I could also do cart count plus equals 1. Same thing. I could also do cart count plus plus. All the same thing. I'm going to leave the shortcut here, but know that all we're doing is adding 1. So very, very straightforward. Finally, we're going to display the updated cart count. Again, where are we displaying the value? Are we storing the value? When we store the value, does that display? There's a lot of things that we have to kind of understand about the system that's not laid out here. So we're inventing these. We're pretending like there's already code, or we can have a dialogue with the product group or the users to try to understand what this means. We're going to make this very simple for today. We'll simply say this dot. So we got get cart count. I'm going to do the opposite, set cart count to the cart count. And there's our actual code. So we started off with our pseudocode. Here's the actual 3 lines of code for that particular pseudocode. All right, let's look at exercise 3. We'll do one more together, and then I'm going to turn you loose for the rest of these. Exercise 3 is a rich client application. We're in a photo editor, so we're opening up photos and then editing them. Given an image is currently loaded into the editor. Code here? No, not really, right? So again, this is assuming that we're already editing the image. So it tells us where in the program we're probably going to be changing code, but we don't need to write anything here. When the user selects the grayscale filter, okay, so they're going to select a grayscale filter. Again, I'm not necessarily writing code. That could be a method. Maybe I say handle grayscale filter selected. That'd be a good name. On filter selected, and maybe an argument. So there's a few different ways to do this. Unlike the first of this exercise 2 here, I'm not going to create a method name for this, but you absolutely could. It could be public void handle grayscale filter selected. That would be a perfectly valid name for this. Then the canvas should redraw the image in black and white. So we're going to need to set the filter to black and white and then redraw the image. So let's run through those. We'll basically set the filter to black and white and then redraw the image. All right, so there's our pseudocode. That's basically all we're doing. Again, you could have done something with 25. I'm going to ignore it. We'll just do for 26. Now that we have our pseudocode, let's break this down into actual code. So set the filter to black and white. Let's see, we'll say this dot set filter, and we could pass something in. Maybe there's an enum or something along those lines, or we could simply make the whole method make more sense. So we'll just do that. So set filter to black and white. I'm going to make it very, very wordy. So we're going to set the filter to black and white. Is this returning anything? No, not really. It doesn't make sense. Arguably, you could make it say whether or not it was successful. You could give it back the filter object. There are things you could return, but we're performing an action. This is a command. Hey, set the filter to black and white. I'm not asking for information back, so it doesn't make sense to necessarily get anything in this particular case. Then we need to redraw the image. Again, we're telling the system, hey, you need to refresh the image. So I'll do that. So we'll say this dot. I'm going to use the word refresh. That's a word that we use often in computer programming. You could certainly say redraw image. I'm going to say refresh image. Same thing. Refresh is just, again, it's a word that we typically use a lot in computer programming, a lot more often than a redraw. Refresh simply means to refresh the screen, refresh the update, refresh whatever it is we're doing. So there's our pseudocode. We're not getting a value out and passing it to the next one in this particular case. In this one, we're simply doing two commands, set the filter, and then refresh the image. So hopefully that helps in order to break these down. Please run through the rest of these, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to 18. There are some examples down below. So if you get stuck, I've given you 1, 7, and 13, the first on each of these in terms of how to break them down into pseudocode and then how to break the pseudocode down into actual code. Again, that's just another way to do it, but that's the idea behind this. So good luck on those. So just to review, your next steps here, but definitely take a look through these, run through this exercise. When you're done, we'll get to the main part of this class, which is pick your language, then open up the README file for the activity and or the exercise and run through the activity through the README file. If you get stuck, there are YouTube videos in each of those README files. Take a look at those and they will help you get unstuck. Good luck, and I'll talk to you soon.